Hey everybody, Ragnarok back with the fifth match for the World Open. I did skip 4 because that was when I had my bye. So this one I was playing as black, and unfortunately I played against somebody in my local club, and one of us has to win, so I did end up winning this game. So definitely felt bad about that, but at the same time it's a tournament, you gotta try your best. So this was a Sicilian Dragon game. He played e4, c5, knight f3, d6, just to prevent e5 from coming forward. d4, I always like to open it up. C takes d4, knight takes d4, knight to f6. This is all standard. I'm attacking his pawn, so he has to develop his knight. This move does prevent any Moroxi bind of c4. If I were to go with the accelerated dragon, technically not accelerated with d6 here, but still he could play c4 and becomes very tough for me to push d5, which is a goal that I have. So he protects his pawn as normal, and then g6 going into the dragon. This is a variation where I could go into the Najdorf if I'd like to with a6. The best response is the Yugoslav Attack, which I've done a couple of different videos on. So Yugoslav, you're going to bring your bishop here, get your queen behind it, and ultimately try to bring your bishop to h6. In some variations you castle first, some variations you bring your bishop to c4, and this happens to be the bishop c4 variation. He had to play f3 first to protect this pawn and also block my knight from coming in and attacking his bishop, because if he did his queen first, I can just come here, and then it's not the best setup. I probably just castle. If he comes here, maybe get my knight in the center, bring the other knight, or I could start to try to kick this knight bishop around. But the point is, it's going to get off of this diagonal because he allows my knight there. So the proper move first is f3. Whoops. f3 first. Castle. Bishop c4 is one variation, as I mentioned. The other one would be to go queen d2 and then castle. Which allows me to go d5, and I don't know if I've done any videos on that variation, but it's definitely playable for both sides. Bishop c4, knight to d7. I can also go knight to c6. I guess I was worried about his knight taking my knight, but taking back with the pawn, you do have a nice one big long pawn island. One hanging pawn over here, but it's still a good formation. No problems there. I bring my knight into the center, attacking his bishop. Also, ideally, I get my bishop, my knight to c4 so that I can attack both the bishop and queen. Because if I can get one of these off the board for my knight, I'll be in much better shape. The reason because this knight bishop is so strong, controls a lot of squares as soon as all of these little diagonal of knights are off the board. So if I can trade for that bishop, all the better. Bishop to d7, just allowing my rook to come over here, which it does, getting on the same file as his king. Now, I think normally here, the best move is generally going to be either h4 or king to b1. However, he opts for g4 right away. And the main reason he did this was because he wanted to get his knight into d5, and if he can play g4 to g5, that will kick my knight away. He gets a good square in here. And then if I kick him away with e6, then the d6 pawn becomes weak. So ultimately, I want to keep my pawns like this throughout the game. And if he can try to force me to change that, then I create weaknesses if I were to move this. Because let's just say he moved somewhere, now he's got more attack on this pawn because it's backwards, and my bishop is too far away to protect it. I'd have to do something like this to protect it, which is really bad. So g4 can be met immediately by b5, because if he takes here, for example, I have no problem trading my bishop for a knight there, because both knights that were attacking the center are now unable to move to this d5 square, and also I get this pawn, which ultimately breaks up his pawn chain. This pawn now becomes isolated and weak, and I can protect it or eventually get it, and when he moves, I mean, I'm just in a good spot, probably going to get this g4 pawn. So that's why he can't take on b5. I don't think h4 is the correct move. What else could he do? I mean, my threat here is to push up at this point. I think he can probably still do king b1, but I feel like h4, it looks scary, but it's definitely, and one of my commenters, Rod, actually brought this up, which helped save this game too. I want to pressure the queen side as much as possible. And there were some games I did leading up to this tournament where I allowed my opponent to attack my kingside sooner than I attacked the queenside. So that's why b5 is so important here. So from here, I just continue trying to break up these pieces. Bishop takes, rook takes, and then here's where I actually missed a strong move. Now, anytime you have your rook here and you've traded the bishop off, I do have the bishop pair, which is good, but it's not doing that much right now. This bishop can't move, so his next move, bishop h6, there's actually a trick in the dragon, which I guess I just somehow missed, where I can actually take this pawn right here. He can't take here because I'm attacking his queen, so if he takes with either the knight or the pawn, doesn't matter. I'll take here next, because the queen now can't take it because I've moved my knight out of the way. So I'm actually up a pawn, and when he moves away, something like this is just really bad. So if he moves away and stays on the same diagonal, the issue really is that I can probably just exchange all of this. And this attack is not nearly as deadly without the bishop, without the rook on the h-file. It still could be strong. I might not want to take that bishop back, but it's very... the attack's ultimately neutralized, and I think black's a little better here having the bishop. He could just bring it here. This pawn is a weakness. Bring the queen out, maybe some potential checks, and get the rook on the c or b file. So that's actually a trick that I just missed. I don't think this is an incorrect move, but it's probably not the best. But I continue with b4 because the knight has to move away. And I think even right here, once he took my bishop, I probably could have done this, attacking the queen, opens up the king, and then I can take here. That might have been a little better. Bring my queen over to a5, ultimately here, and get my rook over. Not sure what the engine calls this, but this actually looks really good for me. So not only is the queen here double attacking this piece, but it's attacking this pawn. So he has to worry about that threat. So yeah, I probably could have done that. I guess I moved too quick and I took the bishop back, but still worked out pretty good. His knight is under attack, so he has to move away. You'll notice he can't go to either of these squares. If he comes up here, I think the reason that's okay for me is because his knight wants to come in here. And if he's really can't go there right away because kind of same idea, just neutralizing his attack. So I think if he came here, maybe I'd take, he takes, and then I probably come here, attacking both of these pieces. So yeah, maybe that wouldn't be that good. So instead I just go a5, try to start pushing these pawns on his queen side. He goes king b1. I attack the center, and the reason it's okay, I think, to play e5 now, I mean, this does create a weakness here, but I think it's fine because this knight only has one square. Maybe I could have done this first, eliminate the knight square, so that right now this knight has nowhere to go, and then threaten a5, e5. Maybe I could have done that, but I thought this was a little quicker, so when he moves away, actually, maybe it's a little slower because I do have to bring my knight back to defend this pawn. If I push here, I didn't want to do that too soon because he's like, the knight is more defensive now. So instead I opt for knight e8, defending the pawn. And then here's, this looks like a mistake to me. I think h5 is probably fine for him, but the double-edged sword of me playing e5 was that I can now do this. So maybe he doesn't break in here. I mean, a check really doesn't do anything. So this is now protected by my queen, where it wasn't before with e5. E5 on e7, so I think that this would be a little better, but I still don't think that g5 does anything because there's nothing he can do to get in here. Even if he somehow gets a knight in there, which I don't even see how he does that easily. Yeah, there's like, how would he even do that? Here, 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 here. I mean, I get to move too, so there's a lot of moves I could do in between that for his knight to come up there. So g5 I don't think is that good. Not crazy about my f5 move, but I think what I wanted to do was kind of open this rook up to come on this file, because the rook's not really going to get over here anytime soon. This pawn needs to be protected, so that's why I played f5. And if he did the en passant move, I believe I would have played, I think rook has to take. And then now I'm free to move my queen, and then my knight up here, and then these spots are where my knight ultimately wants to go. So that's kind of why I didn't mind bringing my knight back here, because he does want to go to these squares at some point, maybe after I push a4. But if we go back, so I just missed one move. So I played f5, so he didn't, en passant, he could have, and then it would have opened up the g file. Instead, he brings his knight away, and as soon as he does that, kind of similar to what I was talking about with neutralizing the attack, I kind of want to trade some pieces off. I play a4, forcing his knight to go back to c1, and then my rook slides over while it's protected by the e-pawn. Queen moves away, I exchange, and then this attack is effectively neutralized. Knight can't come in, queen can't come in, and I have more advanced pawns on his queen side. So he goes to f1, and I think that he has to come here, but I think the reason he didn't do that was because he wants his queen to come back. I'm not really sure. Queen probably should have gone to e2 in the first place, but oh well. So it goes back to f1. It really can't go too many places after this, so it's a little bit out of the game. By opening up these pawns, I've now opened up my diagonal for my bishop, so he actually can do something. Queen comes over, double attack on the d6 pawn. I bring my queen in, protecting both pawns because the queen was attacking this. Brings the knight up, and then I force him to open up his king a little bit. Either way, like if he pushes this pawn, or well, that's pretty bad because I would just take it. But if he pushes check, and that's just bad. So he kind of has to take back. So he takes back with the c pawn. I take back with the a pawn, and if he takes back, I mean this is pretty much almost mate. Queen here check. Rook can slide over at some point, maybe even like this. So he has to push a3 instead, which creates some weaknesses in here. I can get my knight here at some point, or I can potentially sacrifice. So queen comes into the game because the rook and queen are blocked off from the d-pawn, and if he were to go here, I can just come in here, and the pawn is defended again. But now my knight's here instead of back on e8. So instead he brings his queen in, trying to do a queen trade, and if he did, this looks a little better for him. This pawn will probably eventually drop, something like this. We'll eventually get it. And this knight can't be kicked ever, so I didn't want to go for that, so I just slide my queen over, attacking this potentially, also attacking this potentially. If the rook ever slides up or over, he has to worry about that. And at the same time, this knight can't come forward, so it does the only thing it can do is it goes backwards, and now he has a double attack on this pawn. And I'm a little too late to slide my rook over, and actually missed this move, so I feel like I'm still in a good position, but I do have to give up this pawn. The good thing about that is with this pawn gone, I want to get my rook over to the b file, and then potentially have ideas of taking these pawns, especially since my knight attacks both of these squares in one move. And then this pawn will be pinned by my rook. So I'd like to get to that position. So I start off by bringing my rook, my knight, to attack the pawn, which was double attacked again. He takes the pawn, and I slide over. Maybe there was a better place for my rook. Maybe I could have come up first and then over where it's protected, because the problem with this move is this knight can't move here where it wants to go, which is actually a really good outpost for this knight, because if he does, then queen just takes the rook. So I can't do that right away, so I have to actually do two moves where my rook comes up. But for some reason he brings his knight here, maybe because the knight couldn't go anywhere from here, but this kind of creates a liability. So the threat here could be something like, I can't do it right away, but if I could get something in like this check here, you know, that's kind of like the idea, if I can like open it up, but of course not when I'm going to lose a piece like that. But that's the threat I'm working on, where I have some sort of discover attack with check, and the queen is attacking it. The reason, so let's just say, better explain it here, the idea would be to go here, actually. He's in check, and if he takes the knight, queen takes queen. It's a better representation. So the reason I can't do that right now is because the knight is in the way. And as I mentioned, once the queen takes, you know, this is not a threat. So what is a threat is this knight is only protected by the queen, which only has 3 other squares it can move to. So I still want to move that queen off of that diagonal. So I protect my rook, bring it up here, and now you'll notice that he's removed 2 of those squares for the queen. So all I really have to do now is get the queen off of this diagonal. And the easiest way to do that is to go like this. However, I can't do that right now because he does have this check here, and it kind of becomes a little bit dangerous at some point because if he does this, he's protecting his pieces. His queen's on the other side and a little bit more active. So we actually repeated moves a couple times because I needed to get to 40 moves. I think I had about maybe 10-20 minutes left at this point, so I wanted to make sure I had enough time. I have to reach 40 to get the extra half hour. And so at this point, I made a few moves. I didn't want to repeat it too many times. He offered to draw. I declined, and I bring my bishop back. So now he makes a king move, and this is probably the game that leads to his defeat, because this king, he only has one square he can move to. So if I can check him from this way, he's essentially back ranked. So when he goes to king a1, I continue with my plan, because now the queen can't continue to protect this knight, but there's no check anymore. So when he moves away, I take the knight and I'm now up a piece, but that allows this fork here. My bishop is pinned, so I can't actually take the knight. So the best way to get out of this is to threaten checkmate, because if he takes now, there's our checkmate. So same problem if he takes with queen, checkmate. So instead, he decided to do his rook taking here. And I have a couple plans, I guess. One is I could, well, if I take here, queen takes, bishop takes rook. These two passed pawns are a little bit too dangerous for me, I think. So maybe I can block it with knight back here, take out this pawn, but this is pretty bad. So better is when he comes in here, just take the rook, and then if he takes with queen, I can take his knight. Instead, the game ended because it's essentially over anyway, and he went here, and same idea, checkmate in 2. And checkmate. So yeah, that was the game. I thought it was really well played on both sides. My queenside attack, just look at the formation he has over here at the end of the game. Meanwhile, this pawn structure never really did anything on the king side, and I was able to effectively keep him out with my pawns and my bishop. So my king was safer than it looks, because he didn't have anybody that could really infiltrate these squares. I feel like he probably should have played h5 at some point, but he had so much pressure on the queen side that he ultimately couldn't. So that was game 5. I will be uploading game 6 soon, and I'll see you next time.